The moment Jon Snow drove the blade into Daenerys Targaryen's heart, the entire story of Game of Thrones changed forever. Most people watched that scene like it was the tragic end of a queen who flew too close to madness, but every single time I revisit that finale, I notice something colder hiding underneath it. Drogon does not attack Jon. He does not burn the man who murdered his mother. Instead, he melts the Iron Throne, lifts Daenerys gently in his claws, and disappears into the clouds without a single explanation. That was not random grief. That looked deliberate, almost intelligent, like the dragon already knew where he needed to go next. And honestly, the first time I realized that possibility, it completely changed the way I saw the ending. Because if Drogon had a destination, then Daenerys' story never truly ended inside that ruined throne room. It only vanished from the audience's sight while a much darker chapter quietly began somewhere far away in the east. The biggest clue arrives during a scene most viewers barely remember. The new small council sits together after the war, trying to rebuild what remains of Westeros. Samwell Tarly casually mentions that Drogon was last seen flying east. The scene moves quickly, Bran interrupts with a joke, and the conversation shifts before anyone thinks deeply about it. But if you focus closely on Sam's lips, he almost says the name of a city before being cut off. That city is Volantis. Years later, the official Blu-ray commentary confirmed it directly. The showrunners themselves admitted Drogon was heading toward Volantis all along. And once that confirmation clicks into place, the finale suddenly stops feeling complete. It starts feeling unfinished on purpose. Because Volantis is not just another city across the sea, it is one of the oldest surviving powers connected to Valyria, dragons, blood magic, and the religion of the Lord of Light. Sending Drogon there was not a poetic detail hidden for lore fans. It was a warning about what might happen after the credits rolled. Now think about Drogon himself for a second. Dragons in Game of Thrones are not simple animals. The series repeatedly hints they possess deep emotional intelligence. Drogon understands fear, rage, loyalty, and even symbolism. That is exactly why the destruction of the Iron Throne matters so much. He recognizes that the throne is the thing that consumed Daenerys long before Jon's knife did. Then he chooses to carry her body east, instead of leaving her among enemies. Why east specifically? Because somewhere deep in his instincts, Volantis represented safety, memory, and power. The city was founded by descendants of old Valyria, the same civilization that created dragons and ruled the world with fire centuries before the Targaryens arrived in Westeros. To Drogon, Volantis may have felt closer to home than Dragonstone ever did. But there is another reason far more terrifying than history. Hidden inside Volantis stands the greatest temple dedicated to the Lord of Light, and its priests already believed Daenerys was the chosen savior destined to reshape the world through fire. Season 6 quietly prepared us for this revelation years before the finale ever happened. Tyrion meets Kinvara, the high priestess of the Red Temple, hoping she can help stabilize Meereen while Daenerys is gone. At first, the scene feels like political strategy, but then Kinvara begins speaking about Daenerys with absolute religious certainty. She calls her the prince that was promised. She describes her survival in the flames as divine proof. And when Varys challenges her, the entire mood changes instantly. Kinvara reveals secrets from Varys' childhood that nobody else should know, especially the voice he heard inside the flames during his mutilation. That moment honestly gave me chills the first time I saw it, because the series suddenly confirmed these priests were connected to forces beyond ordinary understanding. Their faith was not blind hope. Something answered them. Something listened. And if Kinvara and the priests of Volantis truly believed Daenerys was sent by their god, then her death in King's Landing would not convince them she failed. It would convince them the world betrayed its chosen queen before her purpose was fulfilled. That idea becomes even more dangerous when we remember how resurrection actually works in this universe. Beric Dondarrion dies repeatedly, yet Thoros of Myr keeps bringing him back through prayers to the Lord of Light. Jon Snow suffers the same fate after the Night's Watch murders him. Melisandre resurrects him because she believes his destiny remains unfinished. The pattern never changes. Death is temporary whenever the Lord of Light still has plans for someone. So ask yourself this honestly. If random soldiers and broken men could return from death because they still had roles to play, why would the supposed savior of an entire religion remain dead forever? Especially when her body arrives directly at the largest red temple in existence, carried there by the last living dragon. The symbolism alone feels overwhelming. A fireborn queen delivered to fanatics who worship fire itself. I genuinely think the finale wanted us to connect those pieces without spelling them out directly. Daenerys reaching Volantis is not the end of her journey. It is the setup for rebirth and maybe even vengeance. What makes this theory even stronger is the reaction of Bran Stark during the final council meeting. Most viewers focus on the awkward jokes or Bronn becoming master of coin. But Bran's behavior feels strangely tense once Drogon is mentioned. He immediately says he will try to find the dragon. Why would locating Drogon become the first major concern of a newly crowned king? Bran already survived the White Walkers. The wars are supposedly over. Yet, his attention instantly turns eastward. That detail never sat right with me. Bran is no ordinary ruler anymore. As the three-eyed raven, he sees fragments of the past, present, and possible futures. He understands threats long before other people recognize them. So maybe Bran already knew what Volantis represented. Maybe he understood that if Drogon reached the Red Temple with Daenerys' body intact, resurrection was not just possible, it was likely. Suddenly, Bran's search sounds less like curiosity and more like fear. Because if Daenerys returned with Drogon beside her, Westeros would face a queen backed by religion, prophecy, and surviving armies still loyal to her name. And let's not forget the Unsullied. People usually assume Grey Worm eventually sailed away and the story ended there. But emotionally, that never made sense to me. The Unsullied worship Daenerys almost like a liberator sent to free them from centuries of suffering. The Dothraki followed her because they believed she possessed supernatural strength worthy of conquest. Neither group simply stops believing after one assassination. If rumors spread through Essos that Daenerys had returned from death itself, their loyalty would become unstoppable. Imagine the impact across the Eastern world. Thousands of slaves already viewed her as Mhysa, a mother figure who shattered chains and burned tyrants. Resurrection would transform her from a queen into a divine legend. And Volantis is exactly the kind of city where religious revolutions explode into violence overnight. The Red Priests could easily rally armies by declaring the Chosen One had conquered death through the Lord of Light. Suddenly, the political ending of Game of Thrones turns into something much larger. The wars for crowns become insignificant compared to the rise of a fire messiah with an actual dragon. There is also something deeply unsettling about Jon Snow's fate when you look at this possibility. He kills Daenerys believing he is saving the world from endless destruction, but what if he only delayed it? Jon returns to the north thinking exile is his punishment and peace is finally possible. Meanwhile, beyond the narrow sea, the woman he loved could be resurrected by people who see Jon as the murderer of their sacred queen. That creates a terrifying emotional conflict the finale never openly addresses. Daenerys died believing Jon betrayed her. If she returned carrying that final memory, what would remain of the compassionate girl who once freed slaves in Astapor? Resurrection in this world always changes people. Beric slowly lost pieces of himself each time he came back. Jon returned colder and emotionally distant. So imagine Daenerys reborn through rage, prophecy, and divine worship. She would no longer need Westerosi approval. She would no longer seek love. She would become exactly what everyone feared by the end, not because madness consumed her, but because death stripped away the last fragile pieces of her humanity. And honestly, when I think about Drogon flying through those dark clouds with Daenerys in his claws, the scene stops feeling sad and starts feeling ominous. The music, the silence, the way the dragon disappears instead of dying beside her, all of it feels unfinished in the most deliberate way possible. Game of Thrones spent years teaching us that prophecy always survives longer than kings do. The Lord of Light religion never truly received closure. Kinvara vanished from the story without resolution. Volantis remained untouched despite its importance. Even Azor Ahai was left hanging like an unanswered question. That cannot be accidental. The writers may have ended the immediate battle for the throne, but they quietly left the door open for another war rooted in faith instead of politics. And faith is far more dangerous in this universe because people kill willingly for gods they believe have spoken directly to them. Daenerys alive again would not just threaten Bran's reign. She would threaten the balance of the entire world because millions would view her resurrection as proof that destiny itself stood behind her conquest. The craziest part is that the ending already hinted Westeros might not survive another invasion. The kingdoms are fractured, exhausted, and politically unstable. Sansa separates the north immediately. Arya leaves entirely. Bronn controls the Reach despite knowing almost nothing about governance. The Night's Watch barely has a purpose anymore. Everything looks peaceful on the surface, but underneath, the realm feels weaker than ever before. Now picture Daenerys arriving years later with Drogon fully grown, armies from Essos at her back, and red priests proclaiming her return as a miracle. Who exactly stops her? Bran can see visions, but he cannot fight dragons. Tyrion might understand strategy, yet he already failed to control Daenerys once before. Jon would be forced to confront the woman he killed, and emotionally, that would destroy him. The more you think about it, the more the finale transforms from a conclusion into the first act of another catastrophe waiting to happen. Maybe that is why Drogon melting the throne matters so much. He did not end the game. He erased the old board entirely because a new game was already beginning somewhere beyond the sea. So when people say Game of Thrones ended with disappointment, I honestly think they are only looking at the surface. Yes, the finale rushed major character arcs, and yes, many emotional payoffs felt incomplete. But buried underneath those flaws is one final mystery that completely changes the tone of the ending. Daenerys may not have been the fallen queen history remembers. She may have become something far more powerful after death. Drogon's journey to Volantis connects prophecy, resurrection, dragons, and religion into one terrifying possibility the series never directly confirmed because it wanted audiences debating it for years. And here we are, still talking about it long after the final episode aired. Maybe that was the real ending all along. Not the destruction of the Iron Throne, but the birth of a legend hidden beyond the edge of the story. a queen carried into the east by living fire itself, waiting for the right moment to rise again. There is one more layer to this theory that almost nobody talks about, and the more I dug into it, the more unsettling the finale became for me. Throughout Game of Thrones, fire and ice are constantly treated like two ancient forces moving toward an unavoidable collision. The White Walkers represented death through cold silence, while Daenerys represented destruction through living fire. Jon Snow stood between them because he carried both worlds inside him. He was raised in the frozen north, yet born from Targaryen blood. When Jon kills Daenerys, many viewers assume the balance finally settles. Ice survives while fire dies. But if Daenerys returns in Volantis, then the balance was never resolved at all. It was only paused. Bran becoming king suddenly feels less like a victory and more like an emergency decision made before another storm arrives. A ruler who can see through time might have accepted the crown because he knew a greater threat was still coming from the east. Even Tyrion's final smile around the council table feels strange when you revisit it. Nobody there truly understands what survived beyond the narrow sea. They think they ended tyranny, but they may have accidentally created a martyr powerful enough to unite half the world under a single burning banner. And history inside this universe always treats martyrs as more dangerous than conquerors. That is exactly how revolutions begin. They begin with stories whispered in temples, soldiers carrying rumors across ports, and desperate people searching for someone to believe in. Daenerys already inspired that kind of devotion while alive. Imagine what happens after resurrection. Imagine poor citizens hearing that the Dragon Queen conquered death itself and returned with black wings covering the sky. Fear alone would make cities surrender before battles even started. Honestly, that possibility makes Drogon's final scream hit differently too. It no longer sounds like mourning. It sounds like rage announcing itself to the world before disappearing into the horizon. And there is another tiny detail that keeps bothering me every time I rewatch the finale. Drogon never allows anyone near Daenerys after her death. He protects her body with almost sacred intensity before carrying her away. That mirrors ancient Valyrian funeral traditions where dragon lords were honored through fire and blood rituals connected to rebirth. The show never explains whether Drogon understood those traditions instinctively or whether dragons carry inherited memory from their ancestors, but the imagery feels intentional. A dead queen, a grieving dragon, and a journey toward the greatest center of fire worship in the world. None of those details exist by accident. They form a path. And once you see that path clearly, the ending stops feeling closed forever. Maybe the scariest truth is that Westeros celebrated too early. While nobles argued over crowns and councils, the real story may have continued across the sea, inside red temples glowing with candlelight, where priests gathered around a pale queen and waited for her eyes to open once more before the world burned again. If that theory blew your mind even a little, like, share, subscribe, and send your own questions and theories in the comments. I'm Liam Harrison from MovieCast, and thanks for staying with me until the very end.